Welcome to Witte. My name is Samuel Salmakers. I'm assistant curator here as well as co-organizer of this international research symposium titled Speculative Art Histories. As some of you might know, we have been seeing a lot of humanities scholars at Witte lately, notably as part of Alexandre Singh's monthly causeries, which were part of his ongoing project, The Humans. We invite these academics to share with us their knowledge, which most often we don't get to hear a lot of in the sometimes all too small world of contemporary art. Yet, why should an artist, or a curator, for that matter, who is looking into creation, for example, not talk to an astrophysicist or a Bible scholar? Our aim is to break away from the artificial boundaries that exist between different domains of knowledge and realms of meaning. So with this vision in mind, when our director Defne Ayas, who unfortunately couldn't be here this weekend, started her tenure here over a year ago, one of the first things we started doing was invite professors and researchers of diverse faculties across the country, of course, including Rotterdam's very own Erasmus University, for an informal meeting where we shared with them our program and asked them about their research and interests. Many of these invitations were met with reluctance, to say the least, illustrating the often rigid divide between contemporary art and academia I just referred to. However, when we met with Sjoerd van Tuinen and Robin van den Akker, both members of Center for Art and Philosophy, the right tone was set. Upon our invitation, and since June 2012, the already existing reading group Speculative Philosophy started taking place at Witte twice a month, bringing together a diverse group of people, ranging from philosophers, of course, students from different disciplines, architects, artists, and more. This symposium, which kicked off Thursday evening and yesterday also, is what the reading group has been working towards. On our curriculum were texts by contemporary philosophers including Meillassoux, Harman, and Masumi, as well as seminal art historical texts by authors such as Didi Huberman, Worringer, and Faucillon. We will be hearing more about these authors and others throughout the day, I'm sure. I have one other remark about the program today. There has been one slight change, which is the panel this afternoon will not include Eric Bordelot, because due to unexpected circumstances, he already gave his talk on Thursday evening. But you are all welcome to watch Insurgence, the film on the screen outside, which is a film where, that he worked on together with the video collective Epopée. Without further ado, I would like to invite Elisabeth von Samsonow, who joins us from the Akademie der Bildenden Künste in Vienna, for her keynote lecture. I will be short about all biographies, but you can find them all in the booklet that you all have on your seat. Thank you.
So good morning. Thank you for inviting me to talk here, and this time it's about architecture that I'm going to talk to you. This is not it's not evident why I should talk about architecture, because normally, maybe you know that I work on a different field in anthropology of art and psychoanalysis, but I have to remember you that when I came to the Academy of Fine Arts some 10 years ago, I was integrated in the Department of Architecture, and my chair was designated to teach theory of architecture, philosophy of architecture. So of course I went deeply into this field, and I did some research in connection to my philosophical interests, and I wrote a book called The Collision Between Architecture and the Text in Renaissance Philosophy. And I just want to make brief some remarks on the main thesis of this book, because it was saying that in Renaissance there's a big change, a radical change, a fundamental change in the systems of orientation, because they move from architecture. I mean, the system, the leading system of orientation that has been architecture for a long time is transformed into text. I mean, architecture is fading out as the normative leading model of orientation, the leading model of epistemology, and it becomes text that is designing what is in space, is designing what is knowledge. And here you see it's a big revolution going on, epistemological revolution, and I think that implicitly Lars Boyberg was talking about this also yesterday, coming back to Gothic architecture, which was of course that time the model of orientation, and then sure, talking about Baroque architecture, I mean, it's already a different issue. I mean, this is already an issue about space and text, and this is about mannerism then. So what I would say is that architecture has lost its importance as a leading model for being in space, being in the world, since the late 15th century. It didn't recover yet from this crisis. And I like to make some remarks on this because I try in my talk, which is by the way has been written, my paper has been written under strong impression of having read Negarestani's novel. And by the way, I was a little bit upset yesterday, and I don't know if I should stay under this strong impression, and I have to reshape some of my arguments because I'm not ready to follow this neo-Gnostic plot, this neo-solipsism, this neo-dualistic binary necrotic normative philosophy. I'm not, and I'm in the bad position again as a feminist thinker that I have to, by diplomatic operation, somehow balance out the whole model. So I'm coming here to bring some arguments to the ongoing debate, which is, by the way, completely defined by masculine thinkers. It's a warrior complex formation, a new one. The speculative gang, and I have to see what I can do to consume myself in how do you say, engaging myself as a fairy tale teller, what women normally used to be. I should bring some nice carols to the debate. And I would say that I'm less dealing with art history than I'm offering you an art story related to speculative philosophy. It's more stories, less history. And what's my big problem is that I wrote a big introduction into what I wanted to say, and actually it's only the introduction I'm going to present to you today. But I think it's also a nice offer because you can do with it what you want afterwards by yourself. I mean, you write the main chapter of the talk yourself. So I hope to offer some productive confusions to you today. As a terrorist, I would call myself a terrorist, not a terrorist, but a terrorist. And you will see why I am claiming this title for me. I did a lecture in Vienna recently about pornography in contemporary architecture, and this was one of the main illustrations. You know, maybe Norman Foster's building in London, or the Swiss rebuilding, and yeah, because it's about architecture. Maybe I show some more. Can you? I have it myself. What do I do? Huh? Just click on it. Just click. Wow, yes. Okay. Pornography in contemporary international style architecture. I call it pornography because it's interesting how the body is involved in this type of architecture. Because in the old type of architecture, I would say the one that has been a leading model for orientation, the body was missing, but it was invited. I mean, it was a sort of device. The body had itself to complete. It means this architecture was designed to invite the body to come and feel that it's a device to open up the sense of what the world could be to it. But this type of architecture is not inviting the body to make the body understand what the world is like, but it consumes all sort of sensations and of affects in itself. It simulates the affects by itself as a body that is affected, that is excited, that is moving. So the body actually is not invited to do anything with it except worship what it is. It means come as a customer to this type of architecture, customer or a sort of a person looking at it and not using it. I mean, it's also interesting how this architecture is really somehow a complete loss of is acting in a complete loss of concept about what space can be, and it's much more directed to contemporary art. I mean, flat art, as like minimal art and installation art, and to an idea of space in an ontological sense. Oh yeah, this is the Bilbao stuff. Yeah, okay. Yeah, this is crazy. You know, you can see that there's some fancy thing going on with space. You know, the space somehow try to recover itself from a real big disease somehow, and oh yeah, this is Zaha Hadid's disaster architecture. I mean, it's like simulating disaster. I mean, a train falling from a bridge. By the way, many types of architecture or a lot of buildings simulate movement, fast movement, by the way, like a high-speed train or something like this just passing by. And it's ridiculous because it's would say it's pure kitsch to build a fast movement in frozen eternity like this one. Yeah, this is again Zaha Hadid's museum in Glasgow. It reminds it reminds one of a house, isn't it? Yeah, of a dwarf house maybe. Yeah, in the woods, like Rem Koolhaas. No, leave this and for the start of my talk. So I have 4 chapters to present to you. The first is about architecture and geology. The second is about real estate. The third is about the Electra complex. And the fourth is about architecture as a circus or as a field of pseudometry. I will talk on architecture as the art which is coming first into focus when discussing arts from a speculative philosophical perspective. This is something that also Deleuze was supposing, that architecture is a main machine of making world in an maybe objective way. Architecture constituting a field of thought as well as of practice in an extremely complex sense, relating all fields of political, aesthetic and materialist knowledge, is a most appropriate subject to deal with under the headline of speculative art histories or art stories. So speaking about architecture in terms of speculative philosophy or art theory will not make me immediately focus on specific monuments or compounds or to rest on this focusing and analyze their aesthetic qualities, but to first ask whether and why architecture may be of philosophical relevance. So I'm going to present to you this quite excessive introduction, like a flying squad, in order to clarify some of the implications coming along with architecture if discussed philosophically. This includes necessarily some seemingly feminist thoughts which I painfully miss in the ongoing debate. I confess that for me, as a post-structuralist, Viennese, polymorph, confused, trans-Freudian feminist, it is difficult to understand the idea of object-oriented ontology properly without always and immediately taking the object in a Freudian sense. I mean, the only excuse I have therefore is Stenger's idea of situated knowledge. The object in the Viennese context must be understood as a representative of the original symbiotic partner, a mother-like thing the subject's love is transferred to. This confusion about the object will appear at some points in my talk as I slip and lapse on the crossroads of meanings. To start with an example, reading text from the speculative philosophical circle gave me the feeling of witnessing an unheard of extreme pre-Oedipalization to a point of suprematization of the object on a cosmic scale. In other words, speculative philosophy seems to me a movement driven by a theoretical pre-Oedipalization, which will and must have groundbreaking effects. And as I wrote my paper, it was just impossible for me to get rid of the psychoanalytic version of object. So dealing with architecture in the framework of speculative ontology brings me back to Quentin Meyersu's strong argument in his book After Finitude, everybody knows it, where he quotes Hegel, who had assumed that there is no philosophical geology. Respectively, there is no philosophically possible approach to geology. It's a very funny argument, isn't it? Meyersu refuses Hegel's argument, turning it the other way around and making his own point from Hegel's statement. The existence of the earth, the story or biography of the earth, has to be retold within a philosophical horizon, Meyersu underlines. And why? Because it is, we should find a point where we can extract noetically, epistemologically, a principle which is saying that there is an earth that exists. And can we find such a point? This is what he is asking. He says this in order to look for and prove something ontologically prior and subsisting in relation to mind and knowledge, transcending the established relation between mind and sense data. The question is, how can we know that there is an earth? Meyersu grants this plane of objectivity to reach at the beautiful title of ancestralité. There is an immediate moment of archaization in this concept, which conforms completely with the type of regression described in pre-Oedipalization. Ancestralité obviously echoes an idea and ideal of the prior, both in an ontological and a chronological mode, pointing to a transpersonal or even transhuman level of generation. This argument, again, I admit, confused me enormously, but yet this confusion caused me a sort of illumination, revealing that this object, the ancestralité object, must be a symbolic mother to play the role in this system. Continuing reading these texts, I couldn't corroborate this Freudian interpretation precox of ancestralité, as for instance in Meyersu's text, there's not a single hint on birth or giving birth or something like that. But in Negarestani's book, Cyclonopedia, which I find, by the way, an outstanding account on philosophical geology, I finally unearthed a mother, but in the perverted gestalt of the black, destructive, evil, and devouring one, whose distortion seems to be a result of her fall in collective amnesia. Negarestani's book comprises the only acknowledgement of contemporary philosophical geology and a serious reintroduction of the one big object. I would say it's a big O exclamation mark. Yeah, the one big object O exclamation mark, Earth. It's a symbol for Earth that was always missing. The revolution in speculative philosophy consists, in my eyes, in the short-circuiting of the object and the quest for ancestralité in philosophical or symbolic geology, resulting in a sort of epistemological genealogy. Yeah, you should synthesize the two concepts. And it would therefore be helpful to name this philosophical figure a monotheistic turn. This notion I took from Bruno Latour's latest paper. Monotheistic turn, also not a monotheistic, but a monotheistic turn, or a geistic turn at least, as you prefer. Because, as Negarestani puts it, perhaps the earth is a religious object. It is evidently impossible to think of ancestralité in the sense of the prior without looking at the modes of production genealogically and geologically involved. The differences between the planes of production, it as between generation and production, inevitably have to be discussed. The uprise of an object, like in Harmason's proposal of an ontology of tool being, offers a productive perspective of philosophy as far as objectivity is grounded in an horizon in or from which the generated and the produced lines converge without damaging or reducing each other to the respective secondary or ontologically irrelevant. There's a big difference between generated and produced, the generated and the produced, but maybe not from all points of view. I mean, to generalize the plane of objects, as Harmans tries to do it, or by the way, also Levi Bryan does it, needs to reconsider this difference. Otherwise, the difference between the produced and the generated, in theological terms, the genitum versus the factum, forms a serious and important obstacle to a democracy of objects. Gilbert Simondon writes in his books on the modes of existence of technical objects, in the realm of life, the organ is not separable from the species. In the realm of techniques, it is, because it is just produced, which is why it may be separated from the ensemble which has brought it forth. This is the difference between the generated and the produced. End of quote. This difference seems to me to be relevant within the human field, but it's questionable beyond it. The distinction between the organic and the inorganic might as well be suspended on the once the human field is being transgressed or transcended. I mean, it's interesting that in Après Finitude, Meillassoux clings to this difference of between the organic and the inorganic, which I wouldn't really maintain or I wouldn't affirm. Within the great ontological frame of ancestralité, in the geologic sense, taken as an ontology, it seems unnecessary to cling to the difference between the organic and the inorganic, as well as to the difference between the produced and the generated. This means that from the immanentist point of view of philosophical geology, all object-like beings filling the world are necessarily generated, born within monotheism, and may not in substance be changed by reciprocal interventions on another. So from the point of view from the earth itself, the earth is just filled up with things generated by her, or by it, or by him, or by we, or by them, or by, I don't know which type of personal pronoun I am going to grant the earth. Maybe all together. Within monotheism, which forms a strictly immanentist ontological plane, secessionists manufacturing by humans, it means negative techniques, is inconceivable. Or, on the contrary, human activities have to be recognized as parasitic ones, operated on the level of a logically indisputable complicity from within the geologic system. As long as it is not clear what type of planet we are living in, not on, in, it is hard to guess. Should we consider ourselves enemies of the Earth and its destroyers, or her servants and wish fulfillers? And I would say that mostly of the speculative thinkers have a negative accent to this question, and for especially Negarestani himself, who would call himself a necrotic absolute extinctionist. And this is now my bad role as a feminist to not talk so much about death and extinction, about erotics and love and production and proliferation and blossoming and all that stuff. Yeah, just to remember. Many scholars quoted for many years the text of de la Métrie entitled L'Homme Machine. I think everybody knows it, but nobody had mentioned the text published together with it, which is called L'Homme Plante, the human as a plant. And this text is a little amazing. It is not only treating human women like plants, declaring them the beautiful flowers of the species, as everybody can see, but furthermore offering a strongly pre-Oedipal interpretation of the human in total. La Métrie says human would equivoke plants as they never leave the earth and always stay in close and intimate contact with it, like a tree which never ever withdraws its roots from the soil. La Métrie describes l'homme plante as, I quote, le nourrisson de la terre qui ne quitte jamais son sein. Also the baby, this is why I say pre-Oedipal. I like very much this notion. The baby of the earth, which never leaves its breasts. So now I hope it's get already clearer why I'm fond of Meyersu's reintroduction of geology into philosophy, and find this the major point within the debate. His arguments opens the possibility of thinking the object in terms of universal generation. It as conceives the object in absolute terms, namely as the earth and its proles, what allows recognition of the substance of things as chthonic, also coming from the earth, productive organs. And this is then the moment architecture would come in. Following Meyersu's concept of ancestralité and its supposed ontological consequences, architecture directly stems from geology and therefore forms the first plane of art as the gestalt of human sites as parasites. On the backdrop of an ontologically charged geology, which tends even to suspend metaphysics and put itself on its rank, architecture can be recognized as a cybernetic loop through geology. It is reacting and de-acting on it. Only by upgrading geology may it be said today that we come to the world, or we have a being in the world. Otherwise, we would be forced to admit what has to be admitted, that we are kept in a coming to architecture. And we are a being in architecture and born in a house, which is a definite Gnostic plot. Architecture under the premise of philosophical geology becomes the cognitive and at the same time practical set for what I would call now parageology. Architecture is parageology in this sense. And one is necessarily in need of geology, according to Meyersu's philosophical argument, to re-establish the relationship between geology and architecture. And I conclude this passage, this chapter on geology and architecture with a short remark saying, Hegel has not for nothing not became a major art critic in the field of architecture. Second chapter, real estate. Parasites and real estate. I love the notion of real estate. I mean, in German it is Immobilien, which is also interesting, but it's not as nice as real estate. I mean, especially if you like to speculate with reality, no? It's very good, yeah. Also, architecture is not flat. It is not two-dimensional. It is neither a text nor an image. It is pure plasticity. It is not an image, it is extensive and solid as far as it is the build. And hence it namely doesn't belong to the class of flat or only slightly material things that partake of the plane of the virtual. We can assume this a guarantee of architecture's being real. Let's say architecture is real, it is the domain of real estate, and real estate is anti-flat. But it's not just a chaotic, a flock, a heap, or a felt of mixed lines and points. It comprises a code, a concept, an intention, or a project. Architecture is triumphantly what philosophy would love to be: noetic, conceptual, and real. And the pole position of architecture in this respect forms a potential for philosophy, a starting point from which a journey through the earth, the big O exclamation mark, may begin. The invention of sacred stone temples has written an important chapter in the history of parasites. For example, the temple measured according to the rules by Gudea of Lagash and many other kings who were hybrids of a king and an architect. I mean, I think the sacred stone temples have a different function, like later architecture, even the Gothic architecture, because the Sumerian, Egyptian temples, they have more the tendency to form a sort of touchdown. I mean, the whole direction of it is like a touchdown. It's like a grounding experiment. It's like really a sort of understanding what is a ground, and I think Gothic architecture goes already the other way around. It's like a takeoff experiment. It's already another chapter. Architecture is not only an art as the others, like painting, drawing, installation, drawing, sculpture, multimedia, video art, but may be considered a bridge linking the two planes which might interest us: the plane of ancestralité, it is geology, and art in the sense of plastic art, or parageology. Architecture and sculpture differ in how they treat the relation between outside and inside of a plane or a mass. Architecture's parageology strives to create swollen volumes or containers in geo-imitation. Sculpture, by contrast, is more free in relation to this goal and has itself, time by time, totally stripped off of obligations of that kind. Architecture borrows its key function from the earth itself, namely the arrangement of various materials offering space or biotopes. And this is why it is of ontological interest in the first place. As Reza Nigaristani had pointed out in his thriller, there's a deep form of ressentiment in the world, not only against the sun, which compromises the earth every day in demonstrating that it is dependent on it, but first of all against the earth itself. So here I come in offering some interpretation of this ressentiment against the earth, because it's a big miracle why there is this deep rupture, why there is this deep bias in the relation between humans and the earth. And why, like yesterday, it was clearly visible also in Reza's talk that he was speculating on space, the space that is somehow able to infuse itself on concepts and gestures and somehow makes itself prominent there. but the space can never be understood what it really is. It is a traumatizing black box. So I mean, these are very, very strong marks of what a space is, and what was again left out was the earth. I mean, this is the first space I would say we are living in, and I mean the earth is not over at the surface. I mean it's all its atmospheric globes around it and so on. So I would offer you the following interpretation. On the grand scale, we find the tragedy of Electra performed between the figures of sun, earth, and people. In the interpretation I have given in my book, Anti-Electra, the love for the father is not the immediate reason for Electra hating her mother, but it is the fact that her mother is not regarded as a priestess anymore. She who had acted according to the law of the gods in emulating the hero comes out to be but a simple bourgeois murderer. Mythopoetic and dramaturgical techniques of masking concepts in personifying them have long explicitly been repressed by philosophy. Like you remember this nice saying of Adorno that poetry is everything in philosophy that it does not belong to it. Yeah, but I hope it's changing right now a little bit, and I can see that now again philosophy shows a certain tendency to sympathize with poetry. This is why I dare to personify now these principles. And this, why it is easier today than before to see that the Electra complex actually narrates the geo-complex as much as the Oedipal complex had expressed the theo-complex. And this is easy to understand. The geo-complex is about the underworldly things, the theo-complex about the things above, and both seem to be more or less gendered categories, especially when you understand gender as a logical genus. The two complexes are extremely important for architecture, which is itself cycles around the central axis of the cosmic void, which, as Charles Correa, an Indian architect, has put it, organizes and balances its statics. So Charles Correa would say there is no statics except the void. The central void between the up and the down is organizing all architecture. The Electra complex plot is focused on the fate of an offspring that will stay inside of the matrix and is, for the reason of not being exposed to incest taboo, fixed in the girl's position. And the girl herself is hypnotized by the matrix permanent generation, wishing to partake in it technically, while the Oedipal complex is centered around the hallucinative military telecommando of begetting. The Electra complex represents a problem for the offspring from the moment on the matrix or mother gets successively defective, castrated, impotent, and subordinate. And then, by all means, this offspring tries to keep itself going in the rage of finding an exit, getting out of this, even if by means of self-destruction. Because the earth is dependent upon the sun, the people start to neglect the earth and let it feel its subalternity. People take the role of the Electra, take the role of Electra, who confronts a big problem when her mother loses power. Truly, nothing is more disagreeable than a weak person to depend on. One will get furious with that person. And the ressentiment is more and more turned against the earth directly, which makes it finally difficult to enjoy parageology. I mean architecture, to enjoy it in the form of parageology. All the building, all the digging and hollowing out gets performed more and more by rage and despair against the earth and by complicity. I mean, even the buildings I showed you, they're just objects like dropped down from above, you know, like a lorry coming and just, you know, dropping it anywhere. All the building, all the digging. This is the age of archi-heresy that marks a period where the ontological tie between architecture and geology is broken and dissimulated. Archi-heresy is not operated against a monotheistic God, but against the earth. It is the dismissal of geology as the principle of architecture when, in open heresy, another Earth is simulated, a pseudo-Earth, offering space and arranging material. Whilst the original Earth, or the object, big O exclamation mark, is effectively degenerated to dirt by full extra-complex primal forces, architecture invents and produces another one, an artificial pseudo-Earth equipped by stunning wonders from kitchen to garage, from temple to airport. Cartography replaces geology, GPS orientation. Architecture as archi-heresy secures amnesia against the object, the big object, O exclamation mark. Archi-heresy works in complicity with capitalism in its emphasis of total simulation. Whilst archi-heresy degenerated the original Earth to dust and dirt, capitalism consumes all energies by stressing the gap between generated and produced things again. The absence of the Earth, big O exclamation mark, allows capitalism to offend the absolute plane of generation and replace it secretly by production. And this is why Reza Negarestani and Nick Land would speak about necrotic capitalism, or the necrocracy in capitalism. If generation is conceptually erased, there is neither generation nor putrefaction. There is no life but lifestyle, which will, by the way, be haunted again by the original Earth in the gestalt of global waste. And Negarestani had called this the universal decay. Pseudo-Earth, by the way, is erected upward in the form of an anti-labyrinthic overground and high-rise building system, which in itself forms the antithesis to ground or earth. Archi-heresy is driven by take-off strategies. Yet I suppose, and I guess, that the age of archi-heresy comes to an end now. Why do I think so? This is now a little chapter about the abyss, which played an important role yesterday in Reza's talk, as you remember. Also, I'm talking about hell. Renaissance philosophy's greatest invention was, in text of Nicolas de Cours and Giordano Bruno, for instance, to conceive of infinity by stretching or expanding the diameter of an opposition to the utmost and then beyond. Stressing opposition or binary principles to the extreme opens up another plane of consistency which blasts limited thought into an infinite one. All exercises in contemporary projects in thinking immanence have to start with this warm-up exercise of the coincidentia oppositorum in order not to run the risk of ending with a caricatural concept of immanence. New ways of thinking get common in an extremely slowed down way, which may be why only now we witness the extreme opposition introducing itself ontologically, reintroducing itself ontologically, more or less by itself, as if automatically, by infecting, irritating, and destroying archi-heresy. The affirmation of the higher realms above the high-rise ideology gets seriously weakened by the stirring question, isn't there something below? Isn't maybe the up, the down? The career of the abyss or the inferno has been a permanent degradation. The problem is that in respect to the Earth, we actually do not live in a heliocentric system, but in an infernocentric one, as Peter Sloterdijk has put it. The Earth's core is, what everybody knows, hell. And Goethe had a certain intuition when he let Faustus exclaim, as he's exposed to the top of the mountains in Faust 2, hier war doch mal unten, wo jetzt oben ist. Also here was the down, the infernal down, where now is the top of the mountains. Also here you see the how do you say, the bottom of hell. Yeah. Mephisto is a specialist, a native devil, coming from the depth. Teufel in German and Tiefe are related, who recognizes the geology of the high rise, namely the Alps or something like that, being a former infernal landscape. And by the way, the etymology of hell leads us to Greece, where the people had called themselves the Hellens, in remembrance of a principle or a divine being called hell. The pristine meaning of hell is shiny and bright, which gave the name to Helena, the utmost beauty of the Hellens. She must originally have been the goddess of warriors who secured their immortalization in the Elysian fields, which were, of course, an underground heaven, so to say. A comeback of hell, a perturbating growing necessity to think the earth in a Gaia-Sophic project that regrounds the take-off strategies of philosophy by infernal depth, is what, in the form of a coincidentia oppositorum training, must definitively be put in the curriculum. Architecture gets important here, performing an experimental plane of tectonics that expresses hermeneutically and aesthetically the Earth's productive substance. From an infinite point of view, if ever we reach it, there is no reason to privilege the upper against the lower realms, no reason for a hierarchization of materials, or speaking of a bad hell inside the earth, instead of the bright and shiny terrestrial core, according to the one law saying, the deeper, the brighter. Not far from the confusion that occurs when I'm speaking of an object, or listening to the word object as a Viennese, is the one mixing up depth and hate. Most unborn children, by the way, direct their heads towards the center of the earth, because as intuitive insiders, they find this direction to be of some electromagnetic interest. Against the backdrop of Negaristani's elegy of the desert as a plain horizon, there is this other axis, more integrist than all others, namely the diameter from opposition of the diameter of opposition from which infinity starts off. Then I like to put the center of the earth as a sort of origin of infinity, and otherwise there wouldn't be an architecture. There wouldn't be no architecture in the sense of parageology. And archi-heresy has to be ended with, as well as with infernocentrism. So I come to my last point, architecture today, from circus to geometry or pseudometry. If there once was the Roman circus as a parallel project, as a parody on being, also as in the Roman circus, the power relations have been simulated and exposed to the public, then architecture today is not even a circus anymore. Architecture has already accomplished and passed its being circus in Baroque architecture, which had overtly exposed its virtual and fantastic, its take-off character. In its fixation on the above, modern and contemporary architecture shows symptomatically exactly that which characterized Electra, namely the turn away from the matrix and too much love for the father. Unfortunately, like in all neurotic operations, the symptom is reinforced by the endeavor to suppress the affective motives or some uneasy memory. And in the case of architecture's well-marked symptoms, it is to be found the current use of geometry. As the notion of geometry itself makes evident, as the notion in itself makes evident, it is a technique of measuring the earth. Also, like, there's still this profession of geometer, and there's people walking around with lines and really measuring the fields and the streets and everything, you know. Like the Renaissance philosopher Telesio of Cosenza thought that actually geometry, even as an abstract operation, stems from the experience of dealing with the earth, or acring, as a farming. It's a farming technique. Therese of Cosenza was a revolutionary materialist thinker, and he was, by the way, convinced that it's enough to define a consciousness by saying you can differ warm from cold. And I like very much this idea of geometry. So, and it's an immanent technique of farming or geology. And nowadays, geometry has completely lost contact with its original definition, and according to the ideology of pseudo-earth, has become more of a pseudometry. Giordano Bruno calls this type of geometers that do not know how to ontologically relate geometry, what he did in Infinity, saying that every point in space has n dimensions, infinite dimensions. So he calls those geometers geometers, which means in Latin those who do not have a proper measure, also geamesura, without measure. And geometers is another word for pseudometers. And as I said, even the circus no longer serves as an original prototype of this type of pseudo-technique. Lars Boybreck has therefore, in his beautiful book, The Sympathy with Things, dealt with Gothic architecture, as it is discussed in the writings of Ruskin, discovering a sort of all-over structure of living things all together harmonized and put in a continuum of fractal-like forms. Boybreck went as far as saying that there would be something digital in the Gothic style. And within the focus of Boybreck's great book is the organic layer in the earth's system from which, as he thinks, all forms stem. The organic layer is forming the foundation of Boybreck's own architecture, or was forming, I must say, because he said he was a former architect, as he's the one of the most, or was the one of the most important architects working with biomorph structures. Architecture in this sense becomes more of a gardening pratique than parageology, which is exactly what Gothic architecture definitely has tended to. This is why it's like so botanically decorated. Also, Boybreck's architecture and Gothic architecture I would see much more related to gardening pratique and biology than to geology. So it's another layer within the Earth system. The aesthetics of this architecture culminates in a sort of blossoming or flowering, simulating the bliss of cells in processes of growth. And to me, this is a symptom of the vector of ontologic statics or tectonics pointing at depth already, or hell, that there's already an ongoing revision concerning the exclusive fixation on the higher realm. So what comes up here, is by means of neo-Gothic algorithm a horizontal solidarity related to parabiology as an art practice. Parabiology is the most important field organizing the interactivity of beings, which actually allows to form an integral part of the new post-archi-heretic architecture. But yet parabiology is not the whole thing, because the reference level from which architecture could draw its technique is still somehow missing, namely the measure of the earth, in other things, doing real geometry. In the framework of contemporary speculative philosophy, architecture comes to play a specific role. This is my major thesis. The term from subject to object, to a democracy of object, a tool being of object, all these things point in the same direction. I would like to diagnose this being the rise or the return of the infernoject. The power of infinity that is at stake here, a power that regulates and balances things according to the major oppositions, targets directly the core of the earth around which it slowly turns its inert masses. The quality of these masses create what is known as the electromagnetic field of the earth, building up a continuum of highly specialized features we excessively use And in a sort of cybernetic loop, we first escaped gnostically from the earth for finding now ourselves finally being integral elements of the earth system, and in this position enabled to recognize another earth that it has not been acknowledged or justified yet. So only the rehabilitation of the infernoject may set tectonics into balance and makes architecture possible as the unheard of para-geology. A large part of the built world, the environment of today, could have been molded into the thick surface of the earth. The fetishizing of the eye and the look made architecture an issue of vision, but in fact it is not. It is an issue of the whole body that is equipped by a proper sense of space and matter. And architecture could be, in this sense, the laboratory in which the qualities of the object, big O exclamation mark, which is preeminently the Earth's body itself, until left out by all the legions of body theorists, are being researched. In the first step, as I said, the build may return to Earth to a large extent, what would be at the same time an ecological process. Right off, the temperature of the superficial strata of the Earth's crust is stable and favorable. Techniques of lighting and atmosphere are well enough developed. Instead of impressing the public with pornographic forms and fancy structures, architecture must concentrate on its geological mission. Whereas now the strata of the Earth are completely irrelevant compared with the price per square meter of the superficies, all future architecture will include mining and geologic expedition, as well as meteorologic and ecological research, such as finding out where the veins of water go, as well as those of petrol and any other liquids and tissues and minerals and stones and soft earths. This will be the infernojective operations of an architecture that reconquers and finally integrates its proper foundations. You might argue that this is exactly what Freud had prophesied, saying that the death drive makes one wish to become first an animal, then a plant, and finally a mineral, which is already equal to organic zero or death. But I would then, according again to Freud, have another proposal, and as I said already in the beginning, to remind you of libidinous and erotic drives. They go to the same direction. I have to come up again here. I would then, if I talk so much about geology and architecture, be someone of this party of the necrotophilia thinkers, because I would just beautify the inorganic as the realm of death, and the underworld, the hell, the depths, the things below, and the grave, investing architecture into global necropolization. And as Reza Negarestani and Nick Land had clearly seen, the OOO drive in itself resembles somehow the death drive. It is the radical deconstruction of subjectivity undertaken in itself as a project as crisis as much as in crisis as much as off crisis. The difference between Freud's thesis and the OOO drive lies in a contemporary impossibility of differentiating the organic from the inorganic within the Earth's general materialist status. Indeed, it seems to be, to me, a part of a sort of warrior complex. The death drive and the underworlds are explicitly addressed by Freud and by the speculative thinkers. If you assume the infernoject as a symbolic equivalent to the Earth's insider, you may remember that from a feminist point of view, this insider is as much a dead individual as an unborn one. The confusion about this point is remarkable. Being dead and being unborn are the two confusing characteristics of regression that philosophical regression also aims at. Positive, negative qualities are mixed up in the inside that culminates in a generationality named immanentism. Deleuze and Guattari chose the concept of devenir for this. What is at stake now is a tentative rescue of what I would like to call the unborn condition. As instead of the death and thanatological condition, it's the unborn condition, which may, not to disturb the Dionysian crowd, be understood more as an electro-complex than an electra one. Being inside doubtlessly forms the substantial quality in immanentism, as the concept speaks already out by itself. This is why the fantasy of coming out by being born has to be conceptually replaced by the ontological irreducibility of being unborn, meaning being unborn, I mean, constitutively being unborn within the Earth system. As related to the Earth system, we are never born because we have no outside. There is no outside. And the idea of inside and outside as an organizing principle has to be, let fallen, has to be neglected. Architecture itself recurs an impressive simulation to the great stratum of the inside as the empire of hollow world. And the death drive said to run towards a becoming mineral when deconstructed as an unborn condition powers a breakthrough to another plane of consistency in respect to the immanentist condition. This is why the parageological world of architecture should grant the primitive erotic effects of being unborn. And here again emerges what Deleuze and Guattari had put as phases of the becoming molecular, namely on the first hand becoming animal, on the second becoming girl, in the sense of the anti-electra, the girl which has forever been the underprivileged one in a symbolic and real sense, not even worth a specific treatment in the dramatico-tragic history of philosophy. This is why she is the eternal comedian, the most gifted one in object orientation. It is itself a neutrum, neither a man nor a woman, not even a human, not expelled from the continent of her mother by incest taboo, half born and always half unborn. Greek mythology designed her to go to the underworld and become the queen of Hades, the reign of death. The queen of death is at the same time victorious over it, celebrating the triumph of life that would never cease to return. Persephone would never cease to go down and down again. Persephone's katabasis may be explained as a return to the object or a return of the object, the comeback of the big O exclamation mark, which is the absolute generative level of the earth itself. The ecological movements of the 70s failed because they were still operating on a binary logic of organic and inorganic and good and bad and nature and civilization and humans and the rest. They were fighting for a nature from a to themselves unknown strategic post. They were praying for an earth not having the slightest idea what type of idol it was. Geoamnesia was huge in those times. The speculative people will change this maybe for the sake of their love for the object. Maybe a parageological future architecture sponsored by their thought will once be crowned by their own becoming molecular. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elisabeth, for your wonderful talk. I'd like to invite Rick Dolphin for a 20-minute response and questions from the audience. Rick Dolphin is Senior Fellow at the Center for Humanities at Utrecht University.
So, let me first express my gratitude to the organizers, to Sjoerd van Tuinen and Samuel Salemans for organizing this conference. for inviting these amazing and highly respected keynote speakers, and for having me as a respondent, of course. So now I have an official response to Professor von Samsonow. So first I would like to thank you for this very inspiring talk. I have the greatest sympathy for the argument, which means that I am fully with you when it comes to the feminist argument, to your materialism, the importance of architecture, and the need to rediscover the earth. I thus refuse to critique you. What I do instead is that I want to find out the political argument that you make. Starting from Meillassoux, you set yourself to liberate the earth from the necessity of human thought. This, I think, is a major political gesture, a major emancipatory gesture even perhaps. And this is also where I read your feminist critique on phallogocentrism. Our times demand us to think the earth not as a consequence of human thought. In Deleuze's earliest published text called Desert Islands, that was first published in 1953, he practices such a geophilosophy. Anticipating Meillassoux, Deleuze starts by telling us that, and I quote, islands are either from before or for after humankind, end of quote. In search for a philosophy of the unterritorialized, which could be that space which is not yet inhabited, but just as well the space being smoothened, Deleuze starts his career by searching for the kind of thought that happens at the unterritorialized. Far removed from money, work and housing, far removed from the others with a big O, as will be discussed shortly, the deserted island might be able, might allow us to think, know and understand the earth, the unterritorialized ancestrally. Of all possible islands, it is above all the deserted island, which necessarily provokes a most radical dehumanization, Deleuze calls this throughout the text. The deserted island demands a full surrender in order to be thought. This means that it is impossible to continue one's life once arriving at the shore of a deserted island. A new life has to be invented with the new earth time and again. In a new life, I quote, there is an extraordinary fine topology that relies not on points or objects, but rather on heseieties, on sets of relations, winds, undulations of snow or sand, the song of the sand and the creaking of the ice, the tactile qualities of both, end of quote. This is from Mille Plateau. A new life allows a beautiful earth to be given form, to be built. What Deleuze is after here is what he later calls a world without others. This is not later, by the way. This is in Logic of Sense already. A world without the father, without the mother, without any other through which my desires are directed, through which all sorts of humanism, Christianity, heresy, capitalism remain in power. Others are the mundane preoccupations that keep preventing us from catching up with the movement of the earth prior to humankind, from finding a new form of life. Of course, Deleuze's deserted island calls for a dehumanization, a de-anthropocentrism that you are also in search of when we look also at Negrestani's Cyclonopedia. Negrestani talks of the xerodrome, of the Tellurian Omega, that which is at work underneath the Middle East. Negrestani, and by the way, he talks also of the Middle East as an island. A deserted island, because it's a desert. Negrestani shows us shows how a politics of space necessarily comes with an unterritorializing of colonial and post-colonial ribs and rhythms that cover the Middle East. To get rid of the Theo-complex, the Oedipus, and the Geo-complex, Electra, as you named it, Negrestani introduces us to what he calls the enigma of openness, an idea that lies at the heart of the geophilosophy he proposes. In the following quote, Negrestani summarizes the power of being opened by. And this is a long quote. I think it's very clear, which is the only clear part from Cyclopedia, by the way. So this is it. I am open to you can be recapitulated as I have the capacity to bear your investment, or I afford you. This conservative voice is not associated with will or attention, but with the inevitability of affordance as a mesophilic bond, and with the survival economy and the logic of capacity. If you exceed the capacity by which you can be afforded, I will be cracked, lacerated, and laid open. Despite its dedication to repression, its blind desire for the monopoly of survival, and the authoritarian logic of the boundary, the plane of being open to has never been openly associated with paranoia or regression. Such is the irony of liberalism and anthropomorphic desire. End of quotes. To be opened up by is the invention, the moment of creation. It brings forth the possibility of a wholly other life. The idea of being opened by, not being open to, suggests the way in which the politics of anotherness can be understood to replace that of otherness. So this is really a very different way, a different politics at work. So first we have this otherness, which is kind of being open to the other, and what Negrestani proposes, and I would like you to comment on this in the end. What Negrestani proposes is that we need to search for a politics which is about being opened up by. So it is this opposition between being opened up by and being open to that I invite you to reflect upon. For it is this opposition which captures the radical change from deconstructive thinking, which is still a very humanist endeavor, the dominated emancipatory thinking after '68, and the more speculative new materialist ontology that dominates this conference. Also the notion of sympathy that Lars Spabel talked of yesterday is all about being opened up by an anotherness rather than being open to the other. Yet not in the least place in your paper, this call for a new life, a life that is earthly, that is not polluted by others, necessarily wards off the notion of otherness or even of the self, which also suggests a kind of continuation that immanence refuses to accept. Negrestani's necropolitics demands from us all to become a target. All forms should become a target, which not only refers to us, to organisms, but also we can think of, this is a very nice definition of what the Gothic does, become a target. Every kind of form becomes a target, becomes necessarily in absolute change. All forms should die in order for a new earth to take over and in order for new life to be created. So that was my response.
So again, the question was?
The question, in short, So the question really is about politics. What kind of politics are you proposing to us? What kind of ecological politics are you proposing to us? And I think what Negrestani comes up with in the Cyclonopedia is, I really like the book too, and I think that he especially this opposition that he comes up with in the end, it's in the end of the book, that he introduces this idea of being opened up by. So allowing yourself to be opened up by the earth, for instance, allowing yourself to become a target. Whereas to be open to the other is very maybe masculine or at least anthropocentric way of dealing with the outside world. Whereas to allow yourself to become a target for whatever is outside of us is much more ecological.
I just remember that this passage was followed in Negrestani's book as being opened up by a long reflection on butchery. Am I right?
And on love.
Oh yes, okay. So, okay, both.
This is always a pretty combination, of course.
Also, I would say that the point is if we would be able to consider ourselves as unborn within the Earth system. I mean, being born, it means that you're staying in a context that somehow takes over part of the responsibility for you. I mean, being in service for you for some, to some extent, you know. I think it would be interesting to back the contemporary notion of a society of control by a sort of idea of, how do you say, omnipresence of a guardian angel or something like this, because it's totally horrifying to think that you are only in the control system. I mean, anyway, we are at the end of critique, yeah? So what is following? So we have either control or we have some sort of assistance. And of course we cannot allow that the control is built up within the field of humans or something like this, yeah, because it's totally paranoid. But if we would follow this little trace, I try to offer that we are unborn within the Earth system, because I could imagine that, for example, I mean, if I stay in the petrol plot of Negrestani, then I could say that the Earth is so elegant, you know. She produced, or he, or they, or them, or we produce, as all personal pronouns for the Earth always. They produced the humans as parasites because she wanted to get rid of this oily stuff, you know, in a sort of rejuvenation process. And these parasites invited these nicely built tools to put in this liquid, you know, to get rid of and fire it and move around with it. I mean, I could. I mean, I know that at the moment it's like, you know, standing on a liminal point, because you cannot really be affirmative in the Deleuzian way only, give up all critique and not yet offer another ontological model where you can really still extract some sort of ethical or direct or political directives from. This is the big problem. But I would say that the Earth system as such has to be considered as a system that organizes itself from inside. That it has not to be mastered. I mean, just to give up this idea of mastery, control, exploitation, and I mean, the whole set of culture and civilization until now was designed like this.
Yeah. I remember an interview in which Derrida, of all people, was mentioning that I think the quote was, I am not, and I'm not between brackets, I am not born yet, and then yet also between brackets. Kind of this play with being born and being unborn, which is also a kind of a politics, of course, and I think it comes quite close to the idea that Negristani comes up with. Open yourself up, kind of, and that maybe you can also translate it with necrocracy, in a sense. Should we also involve the people in the audience too?
Anyone has a question? No? Yeah.
Oh.
Yes, a brief one. I was wondering about the difference between the Electra complex and the Oedipus complex in relation to the problematics of ressentiment. The way I understand it, the Oedipus complex already goes a step further because the ressentiment is interiorized in the form of bad conscience. So in the Electra complex, this is not yet the case, I think. But I was wondering, where does ressentiment come from? What is the trauma that leads to ressentiment? And this relates maybe to what you were saying just now in relation to, in response to Rick. Does being born always involve ressentiment for you, or not?
Yes, being born implies ressentiment, I would say, and trauma. This is exactly the position of Negristani. And this is why I don't propose, it's like a diagnosis, I would say. There is no being born. I mean, this is just ridiculous. I mean, who invented the idea of the outside and the inside? I mean, how can you in an infinite immanentist system be born? I mean, where is the outside? Because being born exactly is connotated with the outside. And if you are outside, you are outside, you are outside it. Yeah. It means you are not in. You are not part of the gate. And then from this position, as I mean, the idea that mankind is an outsider within the Earth system, of course, it's a position of ressentiment.
Yes, but usually it's ressentiment that creates the fiction of the outsider. Of let's say, what comes first, ressentiment or the fiction of being born?
I mean, here really I have to open up the whole Pandora's box of the fight for genital priority. You know, so who makes the children? Who is the producer? And then we will see what comes out of it. But this is a whole another story, and I really want to close up with it.
Anyone else? Question?
Yes, I had a question to your respondent. Just a small clarification, because just wanted to gather the history of philosophy a little bit. You said that deconstruction, did I understand you well? That you said that deconstruction is a humanist endeavor? Because that would require, everybody's very young here, so, but if you had a May 68 person here who's in the 70s, I think you would have to give some explanation. So either the history of philosophy has changed, or we need a very short explanation on that.
Yes, the explanation, but this is just me reading Negristani, and he comes up with this opposition between being opened by and being not being open to. And I think that this is really where he tries to come up with a kind of politics that is very different. If I read Derrida, I mean, Derrida is a tricky figure here, but when he talks of hospitality, for instance, he says that I am opening my door to the outside world, which is still me doing that. Whereas Negristani said, no, you should allow your door to be opened or smashed in or whatever, kind of destructed. So this is, I think, a very different kind of a non-humanist way of emancipation.
One more question.
Well, this is directly following up on this suggestion that Negristani makes in this proposition of how to deal with the notion of the other. Maybe you could follow up I was wondering if maybe this relates to your remark, if that would be a real proper strategy to overcome the effect of the definition of the other by proposing it as not as something that you make up as a subject, that you define, but instead of reversing it by letting yourself be invaded by, I don't think you could call it the other than.
No, I agree with you. I think you can call it something else, and I think that Deleuze gives us this, the answer to this question in the logic of sense, where he has a strong critique on otherness, and he comes up with this notion of unotherness, which I only used in a very marginal way here, but unotherness, or the wholly other. And I think what Negrestani does is really continue this line of Deleuze, which is something else than otherness.
Okay.
It's in its discussion of Tournier in the logic of sense.
Was there one?
No?
Hesitation?
I thought it was just interesting that this, I mean, two confusions or different opinions. One about this radicalization of an anti-humanism, that now it seems that Derrida or deconstruction, who were blamed for being anti-humanist for decades, now seem as too humanist. And then, you know, like that's interesting. And the other thing is, if I understood you correctly, in your response, you offered a kind of counter reading to what Elisabeth tried, and it seems like as if Negrestani would be the more radical feminist, you know, because like you said, on the one hand there's the gesture of like opening something up, and you said that's the masculine logic, and then the other thing you didn't name it like feminine, you used another word, you know, the ecological. So there's an opposition of masculine and you didn't really go into the gender discourse, but you said masculine versus ecological. So I understood your reading as Derrida and so on are all humanists, which is like striking or interesting, and then also like Negrestani being the contrary of the masculine logic. So these are kind of striking statements. Just as to enter the debate, maybe.
I don't want to make these very strong claims. I think that there is I mean, these are two different kinds of politics, and I think there's a feminism in both of them. Maybe.
Girlism.
Sorry?
A girlism.
Maybe a girlism is. Yeah, it could be. That would not be my term. That would be your term.
It has to be taken out of the binary of masculinity, and it's really a big advantage that the girl has been left out. The son is already, you know, spoiled by Christianism, but the girl is still somehow, you know, can you really use it? And it has to be used now. It's a symbolic position. It's not spoiled. It's open. It can be used, and it is embedded. It's not a human, because the girl's sex and the girl's being is not derived from the title of human. It's not no man. It's not a man. It's not a man. It's something. It's transhuman, infrahuman, whatever you want. It's a girl. But it's not even, you know, because there's, as Asheuer has written in the Zeit of today, so the new Zeit, that there's a transhumanism threatening the world now. You know, the people are totally crazy and want to be transhuman, and they, you know, they put on the data glasses and that stuff. You know, they become transhuman. So to this sphere, first you have to really propose the girlism, and it's a real. It's a real proposition for mankind now. I mean, this is opening up. I mean, stop being human. Yeah, but not in the sense that you now became a crazy monster, technical, I don't know, zombie. Yeah, but just become a girl.
Okay.
I'd love to be a girl.
Thank you, Elisabeth. Thank you, Rick.